Do you know anyone that you could recommend that could service a Technics cassette deck? I've got a dual cassette deck that will play in one direction but not in the other. And I know it's notorious that Technics cassette decks, the gears will snap on them.
Press Play, the Real Resilience podcast, dedicated to all things real to real.
Well, here at Real Resilience, we could possibly help you out. Whilst we major on the support of the open reel format, we have been known to look at a selection of cassette decks too. Porter Studios and the Tascam 122 are a forte of my colleague Elliot. He's the go-to man when a client contacts us about fixing these machines. And we'll find out more about my guest Reece Beard in this episode of Press Play a little bit later on. It's a conversation we had a while back about the answer to that question as to why this whole tape thing, and by tape I include cassettes and digital formats too, has come back. Now, in the middle of the year, we attended the Northwest Audio Show in Cheshire in the UK. It was well attended, and the presentations on aspects of the reel-to-reel format I delivered throughout the 2 days were well attended too. My voice needed a rest at the end. We're repeating the exercise in early October 2024. The 5th and 6th, that's a Saturday and Sunday, sees Real Resilience at the UK Audio Show at Staverton Park Hotel near Daventry in Northamptonshire. Google UK Audio Show 2024 for more details and put the postcode NN146JT into your sat-nav to make the journey there. Like the Northwest Show, we will be playing pressing master tracks from a variety of artists including Pink Floyd, David Bowie, the Beatles, and I've even got some ABBA. These have been lent to me by one of my clients who collects them, and that's the great thing about this format. Some of the history you learn or even touch when you work on these machines. One of my clients owns an MCI JH24 multitrack that used to belong to George Harrison. He bought it from the estate sale. Another client was in the workshop and told me of his industry background. "Oh yes," he said, "I was in the studio when ABBA recorded this." I found myself in a transfer suite a few years back, fixing an Atari MTR-90 machine. "What's the tape on the machine?" I asked. "Oh, that's a Bob Dylan master tape we're transferring." "I better make sure the record function is disabled on this machine then," I replied. Accidents do happen. I had a Revox PR99 that appeared to be all fixed and ready for an audio alignment. If you know the machine and the procedure, you have to test the replay levels on 2 pins of a 5-pin DIN socket on the rear of the machine. So I had my MRL tape playing on the machine, and as I connected to the first pin, the replay went quiet. Confused at first, I looked at the front of the machine to see it in record, despite the record safe switches being in the off position, and I was wiping the MRL tape too. A weird ground fault on these pins had put the machine into record. And remember, there's no undo button on these machines either. Bob Dylan, now he also made an appearance with the purchase by a London art gallery of 2 Revox A77s recently. They wanted them as part of an art exhibition of Mr. Dylan's work, a set dressing while his music was playing and the art lovers looked at Mr. Dylan's work. One even went off to New York with that leg of the exhibition tour. I showed the staff how to change the voltage selector and instructed them on care in shipping the machine. "We ship artwork worth thousands of dollars around the world. We'll be okay," was the reply. "Yeah, I guess you know best."
My name's Reece Beard, and I make podcasts, radio features for my university course, alongside also managing the university speech-based radio station called Utter Radio.
To my guest, Reece Beard. I was on site at a client who's in the education sector. As an aside, I have several of these, such as universities, and it's nice to see them putting reel-to-reel machines back in their studios for students to be introduced to recording on the format. I met Reece, a student at the uni, by chance. I got into conversation about the analogue tape format, and I thought he would make a great interview as to why GenX, Millenials and Gen Zeds are going back to analogue. The reason why we're hooking up now is because you were putting a poster up about an open mic night I think your radio station was running, and there was a picture of a cassette on the poster, and I just remarked, "Oh, cassettes are all back," and then you spoke about reel to reel, because I said obviously that's the thing that we're talking about now, and I was surprised to learn for someone of your age you have a reel to reel recorder. Is that right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's not studio quality, so it's not like a sort of studio or anything, but so Tandberg does the job for kind of my purposes of playing around.
Why reel-to-reel tape recording as a professional medium dropped out from about the mid 1990s? So frankly, before you were born. So why have you got back into tape?
I've always been fascinated with analog technology. My setup at home is like a Newmark studio desk. It's one that I've maintained myself. I kind of had it inherited to me from someone at Corby Radio who passed away. That was an old station that I used to work at in my hometown. I also have a record player that's kind of standard now. Everyone seems to have one. Yet again, kind of a resurgence in technology. And then I had the idea of making a radio feature as part of a lesson with my lecturer Adam Fowler at the university. And please shout out to Adam. Honestly, one of the most amazing people at the university. And I just had the idea when looking at a presentation. It just had the reel-to-reel machine, and I thought, well, I understand how cassette tapes work because I still kind of used them and played about with them, even at the age of kind of 8 upwards to like the early teenage years before it kind of dropped off, and I've picked it up more recently. And I was like, why don't I make a feature on reel-to-reel tape? I've never made a podcast before. I've never used tape. Why don't I combine both of them things together and learn both of the crafts in one go?
Analog recording itself, just you feel it's better quality or more tactile than modern digital formats that you might get on your phone or something like that?
I like to think that I've kind of got a more alternative perspective to the people who kind of my generation see things as retro. I like to learn things because I like to understand how things came to be. Certainly with nowadays with my editing and using like Adobe Audition, reel to reel has definitely been a big help in me understanding all of the technical terms of things. There's something about having a physical tape there and using things in a manner that involves physical actions apart from using a mouse and a keyboard that just fascinates me. And I think, especially with my generation, as far as I know, at the university, I'm the first person that really has started using reel to reel as a normal thing to kind of produce audio features.
Are your contemporaries using analog formats in a much more creative way than just perhaps we were using them because that's all that existed?
I believe so. Yeah, there's a lot more people using cassette tapes and like physical media like Polaroids and maybe even to some way with digital, even things like iPods are starting to have a bit of a resurgence in terms of like the retroness of the 2000s. And I've definitely seen people using physical media more. Like my partner, she's fascinated with cameras. Emily loves like old cameras, Polaroids, everything up to digital. And she knows how to use them all. And it's something that like I don't really understand how to use in terms of film. And she uses them for her own kind of graphics and artistic purposes. It amazes me in a way that I can't quite understand. And I think a lot of that with my generation is that people will see people of like my age using these technologies and be influenced and think, wow, maybe I can use this to create something creative. And I know that there's an analog studio at the university that the music tech people get involved with that's quite heavily used now as well. And I've heard quite a few people speaking about wanting to use that and the desire to use that and have access to the sort of technology. So yeah, I think people are using it a lot more now for creative purposes.
How are you using your tape machine? Is it purely as a recorder? I record the material to it and then perhaps put it into a digital editor, or are you using it in a creative way, such as tape loops or mixing or editing? Or is it perhaps just like one shot? I am pressing record and that is what's going on to the tape. Was, with digital format, sometimes we nip and tuck and take out the odd note, the odd word, editing down to the absolute nth second, which can be done in analog, but it is a big faff. So how are you using your reel-to-reel recorder?
So originally when I used my recorder, I bought it with the intention of finishing the end segment of my radio feature completely by reel-to-reel tape. Because I wanted it's a feature / podcast, and I wanted it to be me learning the journey along the way. And then when I got to the point where I'd learned how to from like previous managers at stations and people I'd made connections with over the years that just knew how to use it, and I go and learn in person, I wanted to have that knowledge as the ending kind of final point in the podcast before the end cut. So my idea is that I was going to edit on tape physically. So I bought a splicing block. I bought the single edge blades. I bought the Chinograph pencils and edited up using that sort of thing. Would I do it now for other features? Maybe not, unless I had creative intent, because it's not the easiest way of doing it. But other than that, tape loops is something I've yet to explore. I'm going to at some point, just to play around with beats and beds to use for radio features as well. There's this type of avant-garde technology kind of resurgence that happened where they were using reel-to-reel machines and tape machines, which of course is all they had back then, where they'd chop up like a song. So the example I know is Michael Jackson Bad, where they would chop it up, record it multiple times on tape, splice these bits together. So you'd have all the grunts and the ahs and all the beats together. So when you listen to it, it sounds like complete nonsense, but at the same time, it's almost mixed up in a way like DJing, where it's a completely reformed track that's entertaining from a perspective of being complete nonsense, but at the same time being quite artistic.
That reminds me of what the Beatles were doing with the likes of Sergeant Pepper's, where they allegedly, I think it's being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, where John Lennon wanted a random sounds of a fairground organ, and literally they cut on the tape all the individual notes out. So they had lengths of tape, perhaps sort of 3 centimeters long, something like that, threw them up in the air like confetti, and then just collected them all together and spliced them together. And while they got these random tune, really it's sort of coming full circle again, but I can see how it can be used as a creative medium and like that, as opposed to when I was really just using tape. It was just pressing play and record and getting the best quality you possibly could from the performer. I have noticed as well, performers, perhaps when you're interviewing somebody or music recording, that if the band's playing, they know that they can't just drop one particular note in if they've done a bum note, because of all the other instruments and all the limited number of tracks and the way it's working. So do you feel that might have just upping your game? For instance, when you did your podcast, you're recording to tape, you've got to get most of this right to remove the number of edits you need to do.
In my instance, no, because I enjoyed the complexity of having to edit and playing around with just editing for hours. So I bought multiple blank tapes, cost a fortune. It was a big dent in my student loan, but it was good fun. And I have a physical piece of media now that I can see all the splice edits when it runs through the machine, albeit not very well, because it goes through like, it's 7.5 inches per second and you can barely even see the bit of tape whiz by. But I think I didn't perfect how I was saying it into the recording, because I had like several meters worth of tape and the feature at the end was only about 5 minutes. But in the instance of I was creating the entire feature on tape, I definitely would have had to have been careful with how I used the medium to record.
Press Play is the podcast from Real Resilience. Find us at realresilience.co.uk.
Meanwhile, in the world of Real Resilience, we have been busy as usual. Like a tape machine that shouldn't be left too long unused, so getting all creaking in the mechanics, we have to keep moving too. We have expanded our office space and are planning to offer a demo, soak test and machine handover area for clients when they collect their machines. The new space has also allowed us to expand the web shop product storage and packing area, making this area of the business more streamlined. In part 1 of our conversation, Reece was talking about tape, and our tape offering has expanded too. We now sell 2-inch and 1/2-inch RTM tape to add to the existing 1/4-inch product range. You can find all those formats and other accessories on a variety of shop platforms, not only our web shop, but also on eBay and reverb.com too. Into part 2 of our conversation with my guest, Reece Beard. We cover the crux of this whole podcast, why tape has returned, and interestingly, why this resurgence is not confined to those that remember it the first time round. Moving on though, why do you think it's come back? Something of the past, perhaps, rose-tinted spectacles, where it was, people say, it was great music in the 80s or great music in the 70s, and it's all related to that.
I think it's a mix of nostalgia, both for people who lived in the era, people who also didn't but want to want to understand the nostalgia. Curiosity, and I think that was mine in my instance, because I have nostalgia for it, but only because I've spoken to people who were involved through the curiosity.
Do you think it's cool though that you put that cassette on that flyer which started that whole conversation? Do you think it's kind of cool now, or you're making your mixtapes on cassette and therefore you've got your reels? Does that kind of come into it, or am I being too old?
I don't find it cool because at the age of 8, I was playing around with cassette tapes and recording myself on it, not knowing that it was an obsolete medium. It was just a thing that I found about the house, and I was like recording over one of my mum's old like Anastasia mixtapes for our car that I still have, in fact, as well. And it's fun. It's gimmicky in some ways, but I don't know. To me, because I grew up and I was playing around with cassette tapes, reel to reel to me it's just the technological development before like they put the tape into a case. And in my instance, I see cassette tapes as almost like a step back in some ways, because although it's not as easy to damage the tape and it's a lot more consumer friendly, you don't have that option of being able to manipulate and play around with it. And I don't know, they all have their upsides and their downsides. Like reel to reel is great, but the editing takes forever compared to like digital editing. I'd say speed wise, in terms of sound quality, when it comes to like having the speed of the tape going through and the imperfections on it, I'd say that if you record properly, that reel to reel could probably sound just near CD quality when it was first released. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of comparisons, but I don't see it as cool. More so, it's a useful tool to have, but it also has its ups and its downs. Same with cassettes, same with 8-track, which I mean, 8-track and reel to reel are kind of the same thing. Kind of. Yeah, I don't know. Same with CDs. I have CDs. I don't really touch them, but they're nice to have and they're gimmicky as well. But so are most things physical these days. Because of digitization of everything has kind of just turned into a toy, depending on the person's perspective. So I'm not saying that, the person who's crafting reel-to-reel tapes and making modern versions of it. There are places manufacturing new reel-to-reel tapes, completely brand new, out of the box, modern 2020s manufacturing. But I think it's depending on the user. Some people will use it as a toy, as a gimmick. They will not respect it. They will trash it. And some people will use it as a machine that helps to aid their production. So to me, like anything, like how a computer's a machine, it's just a very complex thing full of transistors and like circuit boards. The analog studio that I have next to me is all machines that help do things in a different way.
Do you think it improves the sound? Because there is this argument, MP3 or even any digital encoding kind of takes some of the soul out or makes it more sterile, whereas there's a real sort of in the tape sector, or tape saturation, or that tape warmth. Do you think it actually improves the sound, or is it just different, or is it something over a digital quality? What's your take as somebody who's frankly from the younger age and all your generation? It's been digits all the way through for whatever format. What is your feeling? Does it improve it, or is it something that's maybe a bit more in the mind?
I think it's got character. And to an audiophile who has the setup, that means that they don't have some kind of flaw, like the amplifier is cheap or something where there's a little pinch point in an audio system where it makes the quality worse, which can happen, like if you don't buy the equipment that can all work together. And I think they've all got differences, they've all got their perks and their downsides, and it's a very balanced view. If I was to want something that sounded old and to have, but not old's the wrong word to use. I wanted something that sounded like it was from an older time and kind of had that sound of the thing I was making. I would use it. But just like with vinyl, just like with tape, just like with digital recording, it all depends on your intent and the sound you want. And from a consumer perspective, most people, audiophile wise, would argue until they're blue in the face about which one's better. But there really isn't one true answer. It's just personal preference, really.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely there. Just moving into the future, how long do you think this will last? Do you think it's just a bubble, or is it something that of people your generation are going to take forward?
I think it will carry on as long as people enjoy using it. And there's a lot of factors, because if we were to go in, this is this conversation I've had before with like my parents and people I've known, if we were to go into a situation where, and I'm sure this is something you've probably never had on your podcast before, if we were to go into a situation where we're in a wartime scenario, we're in the bunker, we have nothing, electricity has been basically cut off. You've got 1 hour's worth a day because of blackouts. The only way to listen to music in reality is either if you can try and get some kind of potential voltage from a chemical reaction for a tape player, or you've got to do the old sticker pin on the end of a paper cut, run a vinyl record round circles like you're a maniac in a bunker. And I think that's the only way that we're going to get it, because there's going to be no way of using digital technology. So I think it's all circumstantial. But in the current modern world, if nothing was to change, I think it will come back and go away, just like history always repeats.
That's interesting. So you think it might last a few years, 2, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, then fade away and then perhaps come back 2040 or something. It might be back again. It's almost like a record. What goes around comes around, really. Isn't it?
Yeah, just to put it in more perspective as well, the current situation in Ukraine, right? They've started using AM radio again for the BBC World Service. And that's something that they hadn't broadcast on for many years. I know we still have some AM radio here in Britain, but really it's an industry that's dying because unless you listen to TalkSport or something, most people don't use AM radio. Most people don't use long wave or medium wave either.
I was discussing this with a radio station owner only last week, and he said the main thing that's going to happen is that it's the cost of living crisis that we're facing in this country at the moment, that an AM transmitter eats electricity, and it might, cost of living is very much majored on the individual and households, but companies are going through this as well. So if those companies can make savings by saying, our listeners now listening digitally, whether that's online or a digital terrestrial service, we're going to chop the AM transmitter because it eats electricity. But I can see your point as the fact that an AM transmitter goes so much further than it's simple. And it's also goes so much further than a conventional digital terrestrial service, or indeed something that needs to be delivered by the net with all its infrastructure. So, yeah, I can see why, like in Ukraine, as you say, it for those circumstances, it has come back.
No doubt that it's probably the same on the Russian side as well, where they've probably started broadcasting on older technology as well. Obviously not going to get into the politics, but I believe when it comes to wartime scenarios, I think that's probably where analog technology is going to pull forward, because you accidentally drop a circuit board, you've snapped a transistor off, you can't go and find another one. But analog technology, you can usually transplant things together. You can usually nick a resistor off something, or, pinch a capacitor off something, but you can't remanufacture in your own hands with a soldering iron a computer processing unit, for example.
Well, your Tandberg is probably older than you are, and it's still going strong, whereas I very much doubt in 2050 we'll be even using iPhone 11s, because, they just will not be able to, the software they run will just not be supported.
Oh, so, definitely not.
In that respect, they are kind of green machines, because they haven't, albeit many hundreds at the time did go into landfill, but they are still being used today, 40, 50 years time, 3 times past their manufacturer's expected lifespan, and people are still using them today. There is this argument as well that people talk about CDs or vinyl. The pressing costs of a CD or a vinyl record are far higher than keeping your digital recording in the cloud to create it. But after you've created it, that CD and that piece of vinyl is completely benign in terms of energy use, whereas your cloud recordings are sitting on some hard drive, on several hard drives probably, spinning away in the cloud somewhere, which is only a massive server farm, which is using electricity to keep it running, that actually the energy usage is so much higher to keep all that music in the cloud as opposed to if it was just on a CD. So you could argue that, the material, just say in your bunker or whatever, that music is going to stay. It's not going to be energy hungry. It's not going to be energy inefficient. It will just stay as that pressing effectively, and not require any electricity to maintain its existence.
But at the same time as well, I disagree, because CDs tend to rot after about 20 years or so, unless you store them in like a dry environment. Because what's the average? A house usually goes moldy after built 20, 30 years, something like that. And so I suppose at that point, it's a battle of the chemicals. It's a battle of the conditions you live in. You could let all your tapes rot, and you could still have a hard drive that's whizzing on your computer working perfectly fine because they're sealed.
Possibly. If you've got the software to and the PC to run that software that decode it, of course. But yeah, I can see your point. There's two sides to every argument, and to a certain extent, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Really, isn't it? You take your choice. But I do take on board, going back to the quality audio. I don't subscribe to the fact that analog is better than digital or digital is better than analog. It's all what you like, really. Is it convenience?
Yeah, it's subjective.
Subjective, yeah. Or is it just convenience? It's something that I can just pull a music library up off the cloud straight away, no issues, play it off my phone, off my Home Assist or whatever, and it's there and I can listen to it, as opposed to having to find a CD. But at the flip side, you've got to realise that audio is probably compressed, comes out on mono, as you know, the way that digital artifacts affect the audio. You've just got to put up with that for that convenience. But yeah, that's something that what we choose, really, isn't it?
At the same time as well, though, when cassette tapes were kind of the big thing, we had, it wasn't not compression but noise reduction with Dolby, right? That still lost some of the quality, even though it was analog. So it depends. I think there's always going to be something that will hinder the quality and something that will excel. Like we said, it's probably just subjective.
And then, of course, obviously business things come in after that. So we're well saying we can have the best audio or the best video reproduction going, of course, but it costs an absolute fortune. And frankly, people just aren't going to pay for it. So it's not going to get a market. So it's this sort of halfway house, really, this sort of fine line between quality and convenience and cost to deliver it. Reece, it's been fascinating talking to you, to get it from somebody of sub 30, really, because, you know, frankly, I do meet people who are 35 plus who do not know how to lace a tape machine up when I present it to them, and they've worked in professional audio in studios as well. They've just never seen one of these things and don't even know how to the first thing about just putting the tape on and what the machine does and what you need to do to get these things rolling. So it's fascinating, and I'm really heartened to find somebody of your age who's back into tape. All I can ask you is please spread the word amongst your friends and colleagues and see if they can get back into tape too.
Oh, definitely. Apart from the initial setup cost of getting a studio, if people have basic equipment, why don't you go for it? If you have the money, of course, it's that £80 I spent on the tape machines definitely dented my bank account in some way or another, but I've definitely enjoyed playing around with it.
My thanks to Reece Beard for his insight into why we have seen the return of tape amongst his generation. I extend the opportunity for my guests to tell us more about themselves in their own social media offerings, and Reece will do so shortly. But that's it for this episode, number 27 of the Press Play podcast. We hope to see you in person at the UK Audio Show on the 5th and 6th of October 2024 at the Staventon Park Hotel near Daventry in Northamptonshire. We will have machines to demo pressing masters and other direct-to-tape music, as well as tape, accessories and machines for sale too. And don't forget the presentations on each day. There are 4 a day, so I'll be doing more talking than I'm doing now. Here's Reece to tell us more of his background. In our next podcast, we go back to basics and talk about what to look out for when buying a reel-to-reel machine. That's it. Goodbye, and keep it real.
Find Real Resilience on the web at realresilience.co.uk and on our Facebook page, Real Resilience.
Currently, at the moment, I manage the speech-based radio station at Salford Uni called Utter Radio. That's utter-radio.co.uk. Also, I have a Instagram that's at Reece, spelt the Welsh way, R-H-Y-S, Beardy Beard. So that's Reece Beardy Beard. And also, as well, if anybody wants to get in contact, my email is rhysb45@gmail.com. I'd love to hear anyone else's stories on Reel to Reel and connect with people my age, because frankly, there's not enough people in Manchester that are involved with Reel to Reel, and I'd love to sort of meet a collective of people that are also interested and just have a natter.
Hello, Ian Betson here. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Now, I have a favour to ask. If you're listening via Spotify, please follow this episode and the previous ones and share them too. Same if you get your pods via iTunes, please share away. In fact, please do the same wherever you get your pods. It's the law of the jungle out there, and what you do will make a difference. Thanks in advance. Until the next time, keep it real.